I'm Sarah Chen, and the night my sister called me the family cautionary tale at her graduation party should have been my lowest point. Instead, it became the moment that changed everything. Because 3 hours later, her economics professor pulled me aside and asked for something that left my entire family speechless. But before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Growing up as the older daughter in the Chen household meant living under a microscope of disappointment. My parents, David and Linda Chen, had immigrated from Taiwan with nothing but determination and sky-high expectations for their children. Dad worked his way up from dishwasher to restaurant manager, while Mom cleaned offices at night to put herself through community college, eventually becoming a medical billing specialist. They sacrificed everything to give us opportunities they never had, and they never let us forget it. The pressure was suffocating from day one. While other kids played after school, I was enrolled in Mandarin classes, piano lessons, advanced math tutoring, and weekend SAT prep starting in 7th grade. My parents had mapped out my entire future before I could even spell Harvard. I was supposed to be their American dream made flesh, the daughter who would become a doctor or lawyer, and prove that their sacrifices meant something. My younger sister, Rebecca, or Becca as she preferred, seemed to float through life with an ease that baffled me. 3 years younger, she possessed a natural charm that made everyone gravitate toward her. Where I was intense and driven, Becca was effortlessly popular. Where I stressed over every assignment, she somehow managed decent grades while maintaining an active social life and captain position on the varsity tennis team. The differences between us became apparent early. I remember my 10th birthday party vividly. Mom had spent weeks planning what she called an educational celebration. Instead of typical party games, she organized academic competitions, spelling bees, math races, geography challenges. I was mortified as my friends struggled through questions about the periodic table, while Mom kept score with visible disappointment when I didn't dominate every category. That same year, Becca's 7th birthday was a completely different affair. She wanted a pool party with pizza and music, and somehow our parents agreed. No educational components, no pressure, just kids being kids. When I asked why my party couldn't have been like that, Dad explained that I was the serious one who needed to set an example for academic excellence. Even at 10, I understood that I was being held to standards that didn't apply to my sister. High school intensified these dynamics exponentially. I enrolled in every advanced placement course available, joined debate team, started a tutoring service for underclassmen, and volunteered at the local hospital. My schedule was relentless, but I told myself it was necessary. My parents needed to see results, needed proof that their investment in my education was paying dividends. Meanwhile, Becca joined student government, became homecoming princess, and dated the quarterback of the football team. Our parents celebrated her social successes with the same enthusiasm they reserved for my academic achievements, but somehow her accomplishments seemed to require less effort and generate more genuine joy in our household. The breaking point came during my junior year. I had been working toward early admission to Stanford, maintaining a perfect GPA while taking college-level courses at the local community college. The application process consumed my life for months. I wrote and rewrote essays, secured letters of recommendation, and prepared for interviews with religious dedication. When the rejection letter arrived, I felt my entire world collapse. Not just disappointment, but genuine fear about facing my parents. I had failed at the one thing that justified my existence in their eyes. The conversation that followed remains burned into my memory with crystalline clarity. Mom found me crying in my room, rejection letter crumpled on my desk. Instead of comfort, she sat down with the analytical expression she wore when balancing household accounts. "This is very disappointing, Sarah," she began, her voice flat with controlled emotion. "We invested so much in your education, and Stanford was always the plan. Dad joined us, reading the letter over my shoulder. "Your grades are perfect," he said, confusion evident in his voice. "Your test scores are excellent. Why would they reject you?" The implication hung heavy between us. If perfect wasn't enough, what did that say about me as a person? "Maybe I'm just not good enough," I whispered, the words tasting bitter and foreign. My mother's response crushed whatever remaining confidence I possessed. "Don't talk like that. You just need to work harder. Maybe if you had spent less time on those social activities and more time on meaningful achievements." The irony was devastating. I barely had any social activities, but even my minimal attempts at normal teenage life were suddenly evidence of insufficient dedication. The next few weeks were among the darkest of my adolescence. While my classmates celebrated their college acceptances, I threw myself into backup applications with desperate intensity. My parents' disappointment was palpable, expressed through pointed comments about missed opportunities and lack of focus. Becca, observing the family tension, tried to offer support in her own way. "Sarah, you're still going to college," she pointed out during one particularly difficult dinner. Lots of successful people didn't go to Stanford. Our father turned to her with an expression I'd never seen before, almost gentle. "That's very mature of you, Becca, but Sarah had special opportunities that require special results." The message was clear. I was expected to achieve at levels that didn't apply to anyone else in our family, including my sister. Failure wasn't just personal disappointment. It was a betrayal of everything our parents had worked for. I eventually received acceptance to UC Davis with a partial scholarship, which should have been cause for celebration. Instead, the news was met with resigned acceptance rather than pride. "It's a good school," Mom conceded. "Not what we hoped for, but you can still become a doctor from there." The assumption that I would pursue medicine had never been explicitly discussed, but it permeated every conversation about my future. When I expressed interest in other fields, my parents redirected the conversation back to practical careers that would justify their investment in my education. Starting college felt like a chance for reinvention, an opportunity to discover who I might be away from the constant pressure of parental expectations. For the first time in my life, I chose courses based on interest rather than resume building. I enrolled in creative writing, art history, and philosophy alongside my required science courses. The freedom was intoxicating and terrifying. I discovered I had a natural talent for writing, particularly analytical essays that examined complex social issues. My professors encouraged me to consider graduate school in social work or public policy, fields that had never appeared on my parents' approved career list. Meanwhile, Becca thrived in high school. She maintained solid grades while balancing multiple extracurricular activities and a social life that seemed to exist in a different universe from my own teenage experience. Our parents beamed with pride at her accomplishments, frequently sharing updates about her latest achievements with relatives and family friends. The contrast became especially stark during family dinners when I returned home for holidays. Becca would regale everyone with stories about her latest tennis tournament or student government initiative, while I struggled to explain my academic interests in ways that didn't sound frivolous or impractical. "Sarah is studying social problems," Dad would explain to relatives, his tone suggesting this was somehow less legitimate than traditional pre-professional tracks. "We're hoping she'll focus on medical school preparation soon." I began to feel like I was disappointing everyone simply by existing authentically. The person I was becoming in college, someone who cared about social justice and creative expression, seemed fundamentally incompatible with the person my family needed me to be. My sophomore year brought a revelation that would reshape my understanding of success and purpose. I enrolled in a sociology course called Urban Poverty and Policy Solutions, almost by accident, needing an elective to fulfill graduation requirements. The professor, Dr. Martinez, was unlike any educator I'd encountered before. Instead of lecturing from textbooks, she took our class into the community. We visited homeless shelters, food banks, and community centers. We interviewed families struggling with housing insecurity and spoke with social workers on the front lines of systemic problems. For the first time, my academic work felt connected to real human suffering and potential solutions. My final project examined the relationship between educational funding disparities and long-term economic outcomes in different neighborhoods. The research consumed me in ways that my pre-med courses never had. I spent weeks gathering data, conducting interviews, and crafting policy recommendations that could actually make a difference in people's lives. Dr. Martinez called me to her office after reading my paper. "Sarah, this is graduate-level work," she said, genuine excitement in her voice. "Have you considered pursuing a master's degree in public policy or social work? You have a gift for understanding complex systems and proposing practical solutions." The suggestion felt like permission to want something I'd never allowed myself to consider. But the conversation also filled me with dread about my parents' reaction. How could I explain that I wanted to help people instead of becoming a doctor? How could I justify choosing a field that might not provide the financial security they'd sacrificed to give me? That summer, I worked as an intern at a nonprofit organization focused on educational equity. The experience confirmed everything Dr. Martinez had suggested about my aptitude for social policy work. I loved the research, the advocacy, the direct connection between analysis and action. For the first time in my life, I felt genuinely excited about my future career prospects, but sharing this excitement with my family proved impossible. When I tried to explain my internship work, my parents listened with polite confusion. "That sounds very nice, dear," Mom would say. "But what about your medical school applications? You need to start preparing for the MCAT soon." The disconnect became increasingly painful as my junior year progressed. I was thriving academically, in ways I'd never experienced before, discovering intellectual passions that energized rather than exhausted me. But at home, these achievements felt invisible or irrelevant. Becca, meanwhile, was preparing for her own college applications with far less pressure than I'd experienced. Our parents had somehow adjusted their expectations, understanding that she wasn't destined for medical school but supporting her interests in business and communications. "Becca has such good interpersonal skills," Dad would say with genuine pride. "She'll be successful in whatever field she chooses." The contrast with their attitude toward my career exploration was stark and painful. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I began to feel like I was living two separate lives. At school, I was a rising star in social policy research, earning recognition from professors and peers for innovative thinking and passionate advocacy. At home, I was the disappointing daughter, who was drifting away from practical career goals. The tension reached a crescendo during spring break of my junior year. I had been selected for a prestigious summer research fellowship that would take me to Washington, D.C. to work with a congressional Committee on Education Policy. The opportunity was extraordinary, exactly the kind of experience that could launch a career in public service. When I shared the news at dinner, expecting at least grudging approval, my parents' reaction caught me completely off guard. "Washington, D.C. is very expensive," Mom said immediately. "And this fellowship doesn't pay much. Wouldn't your time be better spent preparing for medical school applications?" Dad nodded in agreement. "Sarah, you're talented, but you need to think practically. How much money do social workers make? How will you pay back student loans? How will you support a family?" Their questions weren't entirely unreasonable, but the tone suggested that my passion for social justice was a luxury they couldn't afford to indulge. I tried to explain the fellowship's prestigious nature, the networking opportunities, the potential for long-term career advancement, but they remained focused on immediate financial concerns. "Maybe you could do this kind of work as a hobby," Mom suggested. After you establish yourself in medicine, doctors can volunteer with social causes. The conversation revealed a fundamental misunderstanding about what motivated me. They saw my interest in social policy as charitable impulse that could be satisfied through weekend volunteering, not a legitimate career path deserving of serious consideration. I accepted the fellowship despite their lukewarm support, spending the summer in D.C. working on legislation that would increase funding for schools in low-income communities. The experience was transformative, confirming my belief that policy work was my calling and introducing me to mentors who would shape my professional development for years to come. But returning home that fall brought fresh challenges. Becca was beginning her senior year of high school, and the family's attention had shifted to her college application process. Watching my parents navigate her choices with flexibility and encouragement highlighted how differently they had approached my academic journey. "Becca, you should apply wherever you feel excited about studying," I heard Mom tell her one evening. The phrase hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't remember anyone ever asking where I felt excited about studying. My choices had always been evaluated through the lens of parental approval and practical considerations. As my senior year began, I faced increasingly urgent pressure to clarify my post-graduation plans. Medical school applications were due soon, and my parents had assumed I would apply despite my obvious lack of enthusiasm for the field. The confrontation I'd been avoiding finally occurred on a cold October evening. I had been working on applications for graduate programs in public policy, hiding my research from my parents to avoid premature conflict. But when Dad found printouts of program requirements on my desk, the truth could no longer be concealed. "What are these?" he asked, holding up materials from Georgetown's Public Policy Institute. I took a deep breath, knowing this conversation would define our relationship for years to come. "I've been researching graduate programs in social policy. I want to work in government, helping create legislation that addresses inequality and social problems." The silence that followed felt eternal. My parents exchanged glances that communicated volumes about their disappointment and confusion. "Sarah," Mom began carefully, "we've supported your interests, but this isn't practical. Social workers don't make good livings. How will you pay back student loans? How will you buy a house, support a family?" "There are well-paying careers in policy work," I replied, trying to keep desperation out of my voice. "Congressional staffers, think tank researchers, nonprofit directors. I can make a decent living while doing work that matters to me." Dad shook his head slowly. "We didn't sacrifice everything so you could work for nonprofits. We wanted you to have security, respect, financial stability. Doctors have all of those things." "But I don't want to be a doctor," I said, finally speaking. The truth I'd been avoiding for years. I never wanted to be a doctor. That was your dream for me, not mine. The hurt in my parents' eyes was immediate and devastating. I had essentially told them that their sacrifices, their planning, their hopes for my future were meaningless to me. "You're making a mistake," Mom said quietly. "You're young and idealistic, but the world is harsh. Money matters. Security matters. You can't eat passion." The conversation ended with no resolution, just increased tension and mutual disappointment. My parents began treating my graduate school research as a phase I would outgrow, while I felt increasingly isolated in my own home. Becca, observing the family dynamics, tried to mediate without taking sides. "Why can't Sarah just study what makes her happy?" she asked during one particularly tense dinner. "Because happiness doesn't pay bills," Dad replied curtly. "Sarah has responsibilities. We invested in her education with certain expectations." The implication that I owed my parents a specific career path because of their financial support added guilt to my already complex emotions. Was I being selfish for wanting to pursue work that felt meaningful rather than lucrative? Was I betraying their sacrifices by choosing passion over profit? These questions haunted me through the winter as I secretly applied to graduate programs, while maintaining the pretense of considering medical school. The duplicity felt awful, but I couldn't bear another confrontation about my future until I had concrete alternatives to present. Spring brought acceptance letters from several prestigious public policy programs, including a full scholarship to Georgetown that would cover tuition and provide a living stipend. The offer was exactly what I needed to prove that my career path could be both meaningful and financially viable. But when I shared the news with my parents, their reaction was not the pride and excitement I had hoped for. Instead, they seemed to view my success as confirmation that I was wasting my potential on an impractical field. "This is wonderful, dear," Mom said with forced enthusiasm. "But have you heard back from medical schools yet? You still have options." The realization that no amount of achievement in my chosen field would satisfy them was crushing. I had earned recognition from prestigious institutions, received financial support that validated my academic abilities, and demonstrated that policy work could provide economic security. But because it wasn't medicine, it wasn't enough. Becca's high school graduation provided a stark contrast to my own academic achievements. Our parents planned an elaborate celebration, inviting extended family and friends to commemorate her accomplishment. The party they threw was everything they had never done for my college graduation, complete with a catered dinner, professional photographs, and speeches highlighting her potential for future success. Watching my sister bask in unconditional family pride while knowing that my own achievements were viewed as disappointments created a complex mix of emotions. I genuinely loved Becca and wanted her to feel celebrated, but I couldn't ignore the disparity in how our accomplishments were recognized. The night of her graduation party would prove to be a turning point, though not in any way I could have anticipated. As I prepared to leave for Washington, D.C. to begin my graduate program, I had no idea that a single conversation would finally validate everything I had been working toward. But that confrontation was still hours away, and in the meantime, I had to navigate a family celebration where I felt simultaneously invisible and judged, loved and misunderstood. The complicated dynamics that had shaped my entire childhood were about to reach their climax, setting the stage for a revelation that would change how everyone saw me forever. The evening of Becca's graduation party arrived with unseasonable humidity that made my dress cling uncomfortably to my skin. I had driven down from Davis specifically for this celebration, taking time off from my summer research fellowship preparation to be present for what Mom called the most important milestone in Rebecca's academic journey. The irony of that phrase wasn't lost on me, considering my own college graduation had been acknowledged with a modest dinner at our usual Chinese restaurant. Our backyard had been transformed into something resembling a wedding reception. White. String lights draped between the oak trees, round tables covered with cream-colored linens, and a professional catering setup that must have cost more than my monthly living expenses. Mom had hired a photographer to document every moment, and Dad had even rented a small stage for speeches. The level of production was staggering, especially compared to the quiet acknowledgement my academic achievements typically received. Extended. Family members I hadn't seen in months mingled on the patio, relatives who had somehow found time to attend Becca's celebration, despite being mysteriously unavailable for my various academic ceremonies over the years. Aunt Patricia, Uncle James, cousins from both sides of the family, and several family friends who had watched us grow up. The guest list was extensive, another detail that highlighted the disparity in how our accomplishments were celebrated. I arrived early to help with final preparations, though Mom seemed to have everything under control with military precision. She assigned me simple tasks like arranging napkins and checking ice levels, while Becca floated between getting ready and greeting early arrivals. Watching her effortless charm with relatives reminded me why she had always been the family favorite. Where I approached social situations with analytical caution, Becca possessed an intuitive understanding of what people wanted to hear. "Sarah, you look wonderful," Aunt Patricia commented when she spotted me near the beverage station. "How are your studies going? Still planning to be a doctor? The question hit like a familiar punch to the stomach. Actually, I'm starting graduate school in public policy this fall, I replied, attempting to inject enthusiasm into my voice. I'll be working on education and social welfare legislation. Her smile faltered slightly. Oh, that's nice. Very generous of you to want to help people. Though I imagine your parents were hoping for something more traditional. The implication hung between us like smoke. Helping people was admirable as a hobby, but not as a career path worthy of respect or financial stability. I excused myself before the conversation could delve deeper into family expectations and parental disappointment. As more guests arrived, I found myself gravitating toward the periphery of conversations, present but not central to the celebration. This had become my default position at family gatherings, observing the dynamics rather than participating fully. Becca commanded attention effortlessly, accepting congratulations and discussing her plans for majoring in business communications at UC San Diego. Rebecca has such a bright future ahead of her, I overheard Mom telling Mrs. Kim from down the street. She's always been so well-rounded, academic success combined with social intelligence. We're very proud of how she's developed into such a confident young woman. The praise was genuine and well-deserved, but it highlighted the different standards applied to our achievements. Becca's solid but not exceptional grades were celebrated as evidence of well-rounded development, while my academic excellence had always been viewed as the minimum acceptable performance. Dad called for attention as the catering staff finished, setting up the dinner buffet. The assembled guests gathered around the small stage where he stood with visible pride, his arm around Becca's shoulders. The image would have been perfect for a family portrait, father and daughter basking in mutual admiration. Thank you all for joining us tonight to celebrate Rebecca's graduation, he began, his voice carrying across the yard with confidence I rarely heard when he discussed my accomplishments. Linda and I are incredibly proud of the young woman she's become. Becca has always brought joy and energy to our family, and we know she'll bring those same qualities to whatever path she chooses in college and beyond. The speech continued for several minutes, highlighting Becca's achievements in academics, athletics, and social leadership. Dad spoke with genuine warmth about her ability to balance multiple commitments while maintaining strong friendships and family relationships. Every word was true and heartfelt, which somehow made it more painful to hear. When he finished, guests applauded enthusiastically while Becca beamed with happiness. She gave a brief response, thanking everyone for their support and expressing excitement about her future. The whole exchange was natural and celebratory, exactly what a graduation party should be. As dinner commenced, I found myself seated at a table with family friends and distant relatives, the social equivalent of being assigned to the kids' table despite being 21 years old. The conversation flowed around topics I could contribute to but wasn't expected to lead. My summer fellowship in Washington, D.C. came up briefly, generating polite interest but no sustained discussion. That sounds very impressive, commented Mr. Rodriguez, Dad's longtime friend from the restaurant industry. Government work must be exciting, though I imagine the pay isn't very good compared to private sector jobs. I explained that public's service careers could be financially rewarding while providing opportunities to create meaningful change, but I could see the skepticism in his expression. The conversation quickly shifted to safer topics like Becca's college plans and the real estate market. The evening progressed with the predictable rhythm of family celebrations. Multiple courses of excellent food, toasts from various relatives, and endless photo opportunities that would preserve this night as a cherished family memory. I participated dutifully, smiling for pictures and offering appropriate compliments, but felt increasingly disconnected from the festivities. Around 9 o'clock, as dessert was being served, Becca approached my table with a group of her high school friends who had been invited to join the celebration. They were bright, confident young women who had clearly benefited from the same social advantages that had shaped my sister's development. I recognized several of them from previous family events, though though none had ever shown much interest in getting to know me beyond basic pleasantries. "Sarah, I want you to meet my friends properly," Becca announced with characteristic enthusiasm. "This is my older sister who's finishing college and starting graduate school in the fall." The introduction was friendly but somehow diminishing, reducing my identity to academic status without mentioning specific achievements or future goals. Her friends responded with polite interest, asking generic questions about college life and post-graduation plans. "What kind of graduate school?" asked Jessica, Becca's closest friend since middle school. "Public policy," I replied. "I'm interested in education reform and social welfare legislation." The response generated confused looks and uncertain smiles. "That sounds really complicated," Jessica said finally. "Like, are you going to be a politician or something?" Before I could explain the diverse career paths available in policy work, Becca jumped in with what she probably intended as helpful clarification. "Sarah's always been the super serious academic type. She's incredibly smart, but she gets really intense about social issues and stuff. Very different from me." The characterization stung because it wasn't entirely inaccurate, but it reduced my passion for meaningful work to a personality quirk rather than a legitimate career choice. Her friends nodded with understanding, as if my academic focus explained everything they needed to know about me. "That's cool that you care about helping people," offered another friend whose name I couldn't remember. "I could never do that kind of work. Too depressing, dealing with all those problems all the time." The conversation moved on to lighter topics related to their upcoming college experiences, leaving me feeling even more isolated despite being surrounded by people. I excused myself to help clear dessert plates, needing a moment away from the subtle dismissal of my life choices. In the kitchen, I found Mom directing the catering staff with characteristic efficiency. She looked up when I entered, her expression softening with what might have been concern or simple acknowledgement of my presence. "Are you enjoying the party, sweetheart?" she asked, though her attention remained partially focused on coordinating cleanup activities. "It's wonderful," I replied honestly. "Becca looks so happy. You and Dad did an amazing job organizing everything." Mom smiled with genuine pleasure. "She deserves this celebration. High school graduation is such an important milestone, and she's worked so hard to get here." The irony of that statement wasn't lost on me, considering how much harder I had worked throughout my academic career for significantly less recognition. But pointing out the disparity would only create tension on what was supposed to be Becca's special night. "I'm proud of her too," I said, and meant it. Whatever resentment I felt about unequal treatment didn't diminish my love for my sister, or my recognition of her genuine accomplishments. As the evening wound down, guests began gathering in the living room for what had become an informal tradition at family celebrations. Dad would invite people to share memories or offer advice to the guest of honor, creating a more intimate conclusion to larger gatherings. I had witnessed this ritual at cousin graduations and anniversary parties, though it had never been part of my own celebrations. The sharing circle began with relatives recounting funny stories from Becca's childhood and expressing pride in her development into a confident young adult. Uncle James told a story about her determination to master tennis, despite initial struggles, while Aunt Patricia praised her kindness toward elderly neighbors. Each contribution painted a picture of someone who was not only successful, but genuinely beloved. When it came time for immediate family to speak, Dad went first with another heartfelt tribute to Becca's character and potential. His words were beautiful and sincere, highlighting qualities that made her special beyond academic achievement. Mom followed with her own emotional speech about watching her younger daughter grow into a remarkable young woman. Then, unexpectedly, Becca stood up to respond. "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight, and for all the support you've given me over the years," she began, her voice carrying clearly through the now quiet room. "I've been really lucky to have such an amazing family and community." She paused, looking around the circle of faces before her gaze settled on me. I especially want to acknowledge my sister Sarah, who's been such an important example in my life. My heart lifted slightly at the unexpected recognition, grateful that she had chosen to include me in her moment of gratitude. But what came next shattered that brief warmth entirely. Sarah has always been the cautionary tale in our family. Becca continued with a laugh that invited others to join her amusement. She's incredibly smart and dedicated, but she's also shown me the importance of balance. Watching her stress herself out over grades and overthink every decision has taught me that success isn't just about academic achievement. You need to know how to relax and enjoy life, too. The room erupted in knowing laughter from family members, who had witnessed my academic intensity over the years. Several relatives nodded in agreement, as if Becca had articulated something they had all been thinking, but were too polite to express directly. I love my sister, Becca continued, but I definitely don't want to end up like her, so focused on studying and serious stuff that I forget to have fun. She's taught me that being too ambitious can actually work against you sometimes. The casual cruelty of her words hit me like a physical blow. In front of our entire extended family, she had reduced my life to a cautionary tale, a negative example of what happened when academic achievement came at the expense of social development. Everything I had worked for, every sacrifice I had made, every moment of stress and dedication was being dismissed as evidence of an unbalanced life worth avoiding. The worst part was that everyone seemed to agree with her assessment. Heads nodded. Around the circle, relatives smiled with understanding, and even my parents looked proud of Becca's wisdom in learning from my supposed mistakes. I had become the family failure, the sister whose choices served as a warning rather than an inspiration. I felt my face burning with humiliation and fury, but training in family harmony kept me seated and silent. Arguing would only confirm their perception of me as overly serious and unable to take a joke. Standing up and leaving would create drama that would overshadow Becca's celebration, so I sat frozen, wearing a smile that felt like it might crack my face while my sister continued, receiving praise for her insight and maturity. The sharing circle concluded with more relatives offering advice and encouragement to Becca, but I barely heard their words. The phrase cautionary tale echoed in my mind, drowning out everything else. Was that really how my family saw me? Not as someone who had worked hard to achieve academic success, but as a negative example of what happened when ambition went too far. As guests began saying their goodbyes and the party officially ended, I moved through the motions of cleanup and farewell conversations in a state of emotional numbness. The humiliation was too fresh and profound to process fully, but beneath it lay a deeper hurt that cut to the core of my identity and self-worth. I helped stack chairs and gather decorations while family members continued praising the wonderful evening and Becca's bright future. Several relatives made sure to tell me how proud they were of my academic achievements, but their words felt hollow after what had transpired during the sharing circle. They were offering consolation prizes, acknowledging my accomplishments while clearly viewing them as less valuable than Becca's social intelligence and life balance. By 10:30, most guests had departed, leaving only immediate family and a few close friends to finish cleanup. I was carrying a stack of plates toward the kitchen when I noticed a man I didn't recognize standing near the dessert table, apparently waiting to speak with someone. He appeared to be in his 50s, professionally dressed despite the casual nature of the party, with an air of authority that suggested he wasn't just another family friend. "Excuse me," he said, approaching as I set down the plates. "Are you Sarah Chen?" I nodded, surprised that he knew my name since I was certain we had never met. "I'm Dr. Harrison, Rebecca's economics professor from this past semester," he continued, extending his hand for a brief shake. "I've heard quite a bit about you from your sister, though I have to say, her descriptions didn't quite capture the full picture." The comment was puzzling, especially given what Becca had just shared publicly about my role as the family cautionary tale. I couldn't imagine what she might have told her professor about me that would prompt him to seek me out. At her graduation party, "It's nice to meet you," I replied carefully. "I hope Becca was a good student in your class." Dr. Harrison smiled with genuine warmth. "She was adequate, though not particularly engaged with the material. Economics requires a certain analytical mindset that doesn't come naturally to everyone. But that's not why I wanted to speak with you." He paused, glancing around the now quieter space before continuing. "Rebecca mentioned during our final conference that her sister was starting graduate school in public policy, specifically focusing on education and social welfare issues. She seemed to think this was somewhat impractical, but frankly, your areas of interest align perfectly with some research I've been pursuing." I felt a flicker of confusion mixed with curiosity. This conversation was heading in a direction I hadn't anticipated, especially after the evening's earlier humiliations. "What kind of research?" I asked. "I've been working with a coalition of universities and policy institutes on a comprehensive study of education funding disparities and their long-term economic impacts," Dr. Harrison explained. "We're particularly interested in the relationship between local property tax structures and educational outcomes across different socioeconomic communities. It's exactly the kind of work that requires both economic analysis and policy expertise." The project sounded fascinating, precisely the type of research that had drawn me toward public policy in the first place. But I couldn't understand why. Becca's economics professor would be discussing it with me at her graduation party. "That sounds like important work," I said. "But I'm not sure why you're telling me about it." Dr. Harrison's expression grew more serious. "Because we're looking for additional research support, and based on what I've heard about your background and interests, you might be exactly what we need. Rebecca mentioned that you've been doing undergraduate research on education policy and that you're starting graduate school with a focus on social welfare legislation. Is that accurate?" I nodded, still processing the surreal nature of this conversation occurring in my parents' living room while I was still reeling from being called a cautionary tale. "Would you be interested in discussing a potential research position?" he continued. "It would be part-time, designed to complement graduate coursework, but it pays quite well and would provide excellent experience for someone pursuing policy work." The offer was unexpected and intriguing, but I found myself hesitating. "I appreciate the interest, but I should mention that I'll be studying at Georgetown in Washington, D.C. I'm not sure how that would work logistically with research based here." Dr. Harrison's face lit up with genuine excitement. "Georgetown! That's perfect! Our research coalition includes faculty from Georgetown's Public Policy Institute. Dr. Patricia Williams is one of our primary investigators, and she specifically mentioned wanting to recruit talented graduate students for the project." The name was familiar from my research into Georgetown's faculty, and I felt a surge of excitement despite the evening's earlier disappointments. Dr. Williams was a respected expert in education policy whose work I had followed during my undergraduate studies. "This is all very unexpected," I admitted. "I'm honored by your interest, but I have to ask why you're offering this to me rather than discussing it with your own students." Dr. Harrison smiled knowingly. "Because most of my students, including your sister, aren't particularly interested in research that examines systemic inequality. They're focused on more traditional business applications of economic principles. But based on the work you've already done and your commitment to social policy, you seem like someone who would bring genuine passion to this type of research." The irony of the situation was almost overwhelming. While my own family saw my academic interests as evidence of an unbalanced life, a respected professor was offering me exactly the kind of opportunity I had been working toward throughout college. "I would definitely be interested in learning more," I said, trying to keep the excitement out of my voice. "Excellent," Dr. Harrison replied, pulling a business card from his jacket pocket. "Why don't you call my office next week and we can discuss the details? I think you'll find this opportunity aligns perfectly with your graduate school goals." As he prepared to leave, Dr. Harrison paused with what appeared to be genuine curiosity. "I have to say, I'm surprised by your sister's characterization of your academic focus as somehow problematic. From everything I've observed, the kind of analytical thinking and dedication required for policy research are exactly the qualities that lead to meaningful careers in public service. His comment validated everything I had been feeling, but couldn't articulate about my family's perception of my choices. Someone with professional expertise was confirming that my academic intensity wasn't a character flaw, but a valuable asset for the career I wanted to pursue. "Thank you," I managed, genuinely moved by his recognition of my potential. "I look forward to speaking with you next week." After Dr. Harrison left, I stood in the now quiet living room holding his business card and trying to process what had just happened. In the span of 3 hours, I had been publicly dismissed as a cautionary tale and then offered a prestigious research opportunity by someone who valued exactly the qualities my family found problematic. The contrast was jarring and illuminating. While my relatives laughed at Becca's characterization of my academic focus as excessive, a respected professor saw those same qualities as evidence of potential for meaningful work. The disconnect highlighted how differently my achievements were valued depending on the audience and their understanding of what I was trying to accomplish. Becca appeared beside me, still glowing from the evening's celebrations, but looking curious about my conversation with Dr. Harrison. "What did Professor Harrison want to talk to you about?" she asked. "I saw him give you his business card." I looked at my sister, the same person who had just reduced my life to a cautionary tale in front of our entire family, and felt a complex mixture of emotions: love, hurt, frustration, and now something approaching vindication all competed for space in my response. "He offered me a research position," I said simply. "Apparently, your economics professor thinks my academic focus might actually be valuable for the kind of work he's doing." Becca's expression shifted from curiosity to something resembling confusion. "Really? What kind of research?" "Education policy and economic analysis," I replied. "The kind of serious academic work you were just telling everyone I'm too focused on." For the first time that evening, my sister seemed to recognize the contradiction between her public characterization of my choices and the professional opportunities those choices were creating. But before she could respond, Mom called from the kitchen, asking for help with the final cleanup. As I folded the business card carefully into my purse, I realized that this night had become something far more significant than Becca's graduation celebration. It had become the moment when I finally understood that my worth wasn't determined by my family's limited understanding of success, but by my own commitment to work that mattered to me. The evening that began with public humiliation was ending with unexpected validation from someone whose opinion actually mattered for my future career. And that shift in perspective was about to change everything about how I saw myself and my place in the world. The drive back to my apartment that night felt surreal, as if I was moving through 2 different realities simultaneously. In one reality, I was the family disappointment who had just been publicly labeled a cautionary tale by my own sister. In the other, I was a promising graduate student who had just been offered a prestigious research opportunity by a respected professor. The whiplash between these contrasting perspectives left me emotionally exhausted and strangely energized at the same time. I couldn't stop replaying Becca's words in my mind. Cautionary tale. The phrase had been delivered with such casual confidence, as if it was an obvious truth that everyone already understood. The laughter that followed had been even worse, confirmation that my family viewed my academic dedication as something to be pitied rather than admired. For 21 years, I had believed that working harder would eventually earn their respect and recognition. Instead, my efforts had apparently marked me as someone to avoid becoming. But Dr. Harrison's offer complicated that narrative in ways I was still processing. His interest in my research background suggested that what my family saw as obsessive academic focus, professionals in my field viewed as valuable preparation for meaningful work. The disconnect was so stark that I wondered if we were even talking about the same person. I spent the weekend replaying the evening's events, oscillating between hurt over my family's perception and excitement about the research opportunity. By Monday morning, I had decided to call Dr. Harrison's office, though I was nervous about seeming too eager or unprofessional in my response to his offer. His secretary scheduled a phone appointment for Tuesday afternoon, giving me time to research the education funding project he had mentioned and prepare thoughtful questions about the position. The more I learned about the Research Coalition and their previous publications, the more impressed I became with the scope and significance of their work. This wasn't just academic busy work, but research that could influence actual policy decisions about education funding across multiple states. When Tuesday's call came, Dr. Harrison's enthusiasm for the project was immediately apparent. He explained that the coalition had received a substantial grant from the Department of Education to examine how property tax-based funding systems perpetuated educational inequality and how alternative funding models might create more equitable outcomes. My role would involve data analysis, literature review, and eventually co-authoring publications that could influence legislative discussions about education finance reform. The position pays $25,000 annually, he continued, which should complement your graduate assistantship quite well. We're looking for someone who can commit to at least 2 years, ideally through the completion of their master's degree. The salary was more than I had expected for part-time research work, and the timeline aligned perfectly with my graduate school plans. More importantly, the project represented exactly the kind of policy research I wanted to pursue after completing my degree. I'm definitely interested, I told him, trying to maintain professional composure despite my excitement. When would you need an answer? There's no rush, Dr. Harrison replied. But I should mention that Dr. Williams at Georgetown is particularly eager to meet with you. She's familiar with some of your undergraduate work through mutual colleagues and thinks you could make significant contributions to the project. The fact that Dr. Williams had already heard of my research was both thrilling and terrifying. I had submitted papers to undergraduate conferences and policy journals, but I hadn't realized that established academics were paying attention to student work at that level. After confirming that I would accept the position pending a formal interview with Dr. Williams, I hung up feeling like my entire future had suddenly shifted into focus. This research opportunity wasn't just a job. It was validation that my academic choices were leading somewhere meaningful and valuable. But first, I had to get through the remainder of the summer and navigate the continuing fallout from Becca's graduation party comments. The cautionary tale label had apparently resonated with our extended family, because I started receiving calls and messages from relatives offering unsolicited advice about work-life balance and the importance of not letting academic success come at the expense of personal happiness. Aunt Patricia called 3 days after the party, ostensibly to thank me for helping with cleanup, but really to express concern about my intense approach to education. "You know, sweetheart," she said in the tone adults used when dispensing wisdom to misguided young people. "There's more to life than grades and achievements. Your sister really made a good point about finding balance." The conversation was painful because it confirmed that Becca's characterization had been accepted as accurate by family members who barely knew me. They saw my academic focus as evidence of an unbalanced life rather than preparation for a career I was passionate about pursuing. Similar conversations followed with other relatives, each offering variations on the same theme. I was too serious, too focused on academic achievement, too willing to sacrifice fun and relaxation for studying and research. The consensus seemed to be that Becca had demonstrated superior wisdom by learning from my supposed mistakes and choosing a more balanced approach to success. The irony was that none of these well-meaning relatives had any understanding of what my academic work actually involved or why it mattered to me. They saw studying as drudgery I imposed on myself rather than engaging with subjects I found genuinely fascinating. Their advice to lighten up and enjoy life more missed the point entirely. which was that I did enjoy my academic work and found deep satisfaction in research that could contribute to solving real social problems. My parents' response to the aftermath was characteristically complex. They seemed proud that Becca had been praised for her insight and maturity, but also uncomfortable with the implication that my academic achievements were somehow problematic. Dad made several awkward attempts to defend my work ethic while also suggesting that I could benefit from Becca's example of maintaining social connections alongside academic responsibilities. "Your sister isn't criticizing your intelligence or your accomplishments," he explained during a particularly painful phone conversation. "She's just pointing out that success requires different skills, not just academic ones." Mom took a similar approach, praising my dedication, while gently suggesting that I could learn from Becca's ability to make everything look effortless. The subtext was clear. My visible effort and intensity were somehow less admirable than my sister's, apparently. Natural ease with balancing multiple commitments. These conversations reinforced my growing understanding that my family and I had fundamentally different definitions of success and different values about how to achieve it. They prioritized social intelligence and effortless competence, while I valued depth of knowledge and commitment to meaningful work. Neither approach was inherently superior, but the mismatch created constant tension and misunderstanding. The research position interview with Dr. Williams took place via video call in late July, and it went better than I had dared to hope. She was familiar with my undergraduate thesis on education funding disparities and asked thoughtful questions about my methodology and conclusions. More importantly, she seemed genuinely interested in my perspective on how policy research could be translated into actionable legislative proposals. "One thing I particularly appreciate about your work," she said near the end of our conversation, "is your focus on practical implementation rather than purely theoretical analysis. Too many graduate students get caught up in abstract policy debates without considering how their recommendations might actually work in real political environments." Her observation highlighted exactly what had drawn me to public policy in the first place. I didn't want to study social problems in isolation, but to develop solutions that could actually improve people's lives through effective legislation and program design. "That's exactly what I hope to focus on during graduate school," I replied. "I want my research to have real-world applications, not just academic value." Dr. Williams smiled with what appeared to be genuine approval. "I think you'll find this project provides excellent preparation for that kind of career. We work closely with state education departments and legislative committees, so your research will be feeding directly into ongoing policy discussions." The interview concluded with a formal offer to join the research team, starting in August and continuing through the completion of my master's degree. The opportunity was everything I had hoped for and more, providing both financial support and professional experience that would be invaluable for my future career in public policy. But when I called my parents to share the news, their response was characteristically complicated. They expressed pride in my accomplishment while also managing to convey continued concern about my chosen career path. "That's wonderful, dear," Mom said with forced enthusiasm, "though I still don't understand why you're so focused on government work. Wouldn't you make more money in the private sector?" Dad's response was more direct. "It's nice that they recognize your abilities, Sarah, but are you sure this is the best use of your time? You could probably get into medical school if you really applied yourself." The suggestion that I hadn't been applying myself throughout my undergraduate career was particularly galling, considering how many hours I had devoted to maintaining perfect grades while pursuing meaningful research opportunities. But arguing would only confirm their perception of me as overly defensive about my academic choices. Instead, I tried to explain the long-term career prospects in policy work and the potential for advancement into positions with significant responsibility and compensation. But I could tell they remained skeptical about whether my chosen field would provide the security and respect they wanted for me. Becca's reaction to my research position was more complex and ultimately more hurtful than my parents' lukewarm support. When I mentioned the opportunity during a family phone call, she seemed genuinely surprised that Dr. Harrison had followed through on his interest. "I didn't think he was being serious when he asked about you at the party," she admitted. "I mean, I told him you were smart and everything, but I also mentioned that you tend to get really obsessed with academic stuff. I thought he might find that off-putting." The revelation that she had characterized my academic focus as obsessive to her professor was like a punch to the stomach. While I had assumed Dr. Harrison's interest was based on positive information about my research background, it now seemed possible that Becca's description had actually worked against me, making his offer even more remarkable. "What exactly did you tell him about me?" I asked, trying to keep accusation out of my voice. Becca paused, apparently recognizing that she might have said something problematic. "Nothing bad, really. Just that you were super focused on school and policy stuff, maybe a little too intense sometimes. I thought I was being honest about your personality." Her casual dismissal of my passion as too intense revealed how fundamentally she misunderstood what motivated my academic work. To her, my research interests were quirky personality traits rather than preparation for meaningful professional work. The fact that a respected professor valued exactly those qualities she found problematic highlighted the gulf between her understanding and professional reality. As August approached and I prepared to move to Washington, D.C. for graduate school, I found myself increasingly excited about starting fresh in an environment where my academic interests would be understood and valued. The research position with Dr. Williams represented more than just professional opportunity. It was validation that my choices had been leading somewhere worthwhile, despite my family's concerns. The week before my departure, Becca surprised me by asking if we could have lunch together, just the two of us. She suggested a restaurant near my apartment, neutral territory where we could talk without family dynamics complicating the conversation. I agreed, though I was nervous about what she might want to discuss. Our relationship had been strained since the graduation party, not because of overt conflict, but because of the growing awareness that we saw my life and choices very differently. She arrived at the restaurant looking uncharacteristically uncertain, lacking the confident demeanor that usually defined her presence. We ordered quickly and then sat in awkward silence until she finally addressed the elephant in the room. "I've been thinking about what I said at my graduation party," she began, her voice smaller than usual, "about the cautionary tale thing. I'm starting to realize that maybe I didn't express that very well." I waited for her to continue, not wanting to let her off the hook too easily, but also genuinely curious about what had prompted this conversation. "The thing is," she continued, "I've always felt like I was living in your shadow academically. You were always the smart one, the one with perfect grades and impressive achievements. I guess I convinced myself that your way of being successful was somehow wrong or unhealthy because it felt so impossible for me to match." Her admission caught me completely off guard. I had never considered that my academic success might have created pressure or insecurity for her, especially given how much praise and attention she received for her social accomplishments. "I didn't realize you felt that way," I said honestly. "You always seemed so confident and successful in your own areas." Becca shook her head slowly. "I was successful at different things, but they never felt as important as what you were doing. Like, I could win tennis tournaments and get elected to student government, but you were doing actual research and getting recognition from professors. Mom and Dad acted like your achievements were more serious, more impressive." The conversation was revealing layers of family dynamics I had never fully understood. While I had felt overlooked and undervalued compared to Becca's social success, she had apparently felt intellectually inferior compared to my academic achievements. We had both been struggling with different forms of inadequacy within the same family system. "I think I said that stuff at the party because I wanted to believe that my approach was better," she continued. "That being social and balanced was smarter than being so focused on academics. But then your professor offered you that research job, and I realized that maybe I was wrong about your choices being problematic." Her honesty was both touching and painful. I appreciated her willingness to acknowledge that her graduation party comments had been hurtful, but I also felt sad that it had taken external validation from Dr. Harrison for her to reconsider her assessment of my choices. "I've never thought your accomplishments were less important than mine," I told her. "They're just different. You have social intelligence and leadership skills that I've always envied. The problem wasn't that we were different, but that we kept comparing ourselves to each other instead of appreciating what we each brought to the family." We talked for nearly 2 hours, addressing years of unspoken competition and misunderstanding. Becca admitted that our parents' different expectations for each of us had created pressure for her to be the easy daughter who didn't cause stress or require intensive support. Meanwhile, I had felt like I needed to justify their investment in my education through increasingly impressive achievements. "I'm sorry for calling you a cautionary tale," she said as we prepared to leave. "You're not a cautionary tale. You're someone who figured out what you wanted to do and worked really hard to make it happen. That's actually pretty impressive." The apology meant more to me than I had expected, though it couldn't entirely erase the hurt of being publicly diminished in front of our entire family. But it did help me understand that Becca's comments had been more about her own insecurities than accurate assessment of my life choices. As I drove home from our lunch, I reflected on how much my perspective had changed since the graduation party. 3 weeks earlier, I had left that celebration feeling humiliated and questioning whether my academic focus really was excessive or unhealthy. Now, with the research position confirmed and a clearer understanding of the family dynamics that had shaped Becca's comments, I felt more confident about my choices than ever before. The external validation from Dr. Harrison and Dr. Williams had been important, but even more significant was my growing understanding that my family's limited perspective on success didn't define my worth or potential. They could love me while misunderstanding what motivated me, and I could love them while refusing to let their confusion about my goals undermine my confidence. Moving to Washington, D.C. felt like stepping into a life that had been waiting for me, where my academic intensity would be viewed as an asset rather than a character flaw. The research position would allow me to work on problems I cared about while building the skills and connections necessary for a meaningful career in public policy. On my last night in California, I sat in my nearly empty apartment thinking about the journey that had brought me to this point. The path hadn't been linear or easy, and it had required learning to value my own judgment over family approval. But as I prepared to start graduate school with a prestigious research position already secured, I finally felt like I was moving toward a future that matched my values and aspirations. The girl who had been called a cautionary tale was about to become a policy researcher whose work might actually influence how education funding decisions were made across multiple states. The transformation wasn't just professional but personal, representing a shift from seeking external validation to trusting my own understanding of what constituted a meaningful life. The next morning, as I loaded my car for the drive to Washington, I received a text from Becca wishing me luck and expressing genuine pride in my accomplishments. It was a small gesture, but it represented the beginning of a relationship based on mutual respect rather than competition or comparison. Dr. Harrison had unknowingly given me more than just a research opportunity that night at the graduation party. He had provided a different lens through which to view my academic choices, one that revealed them as valuable preparation for important work rather than evidence of an unbalanced life. That shift in perspective was about to change everything, about how I saw myself and my potential for making a difference in the world. 2 years into my graduate program at Georgetown, I was walking across campus after a particularly productive research meeting when my phone buzzed with an unexpected call from Mom. Her voice carried an excitement I hadn't heard in years, mixed with something that sounded suspiciously like pride. "Sarah, you're not going to believe what just happened," she began without her usual cautious pleasantries. "Mrs. Patterson from down the street just called me. Her daughter Emily is applying to graduate schools, and apparently her advisor mentioned your research on education funding." Emily's professor said your work is being cited in academic journals and that you're considered one of the rising stars in education policy research. The irony of receiving recognition through neighborhood gossip wasn't lost on me, but Mom's genuine enthusiasm was touching. For 2 years, she had struggled to understand why I had chosen policy work over more traditional career paths. Now, suddenly, my research was earning recognition from sources she could understand and respect. "That's wonderful news," I replied, though I was surprised that my work had reached Emily Patterson's advisor. The education policy field was relatively small, but I hadn't realized that my contributions were gaining that level of visibility. "Mrs. Patterson said Emily specifically wanted to know about your graduate program because she's interested in similar research," Mom continued. "I told her I'd ask if you might be willing to speak with Emily about your experiences." The request was simple enough, but it represented a significant shift in how my family viewed my academic choices. Instead of questioning my career path, Mom was now actively promoting my expertise to other families. The transformation felt surreal after years of defending my decisions against their well-meaning skepticism. That conversation proved to be just the beginning of a remarkable few months that would fundamentally alter my family's understanding of what I had been working toward. The Research Coalition's first major publication came out in the Journal of Education Finance 3 weeks later, with my name listed as second author on a paper that would influence state-level policy discussions across the country. Dr. Williams called me the day the article was published online. "Sarah, you should know that we're already getting requests for interviews from education reporters at major newspapers," she said with obvious excitement. "The methodology you developed for analyzing property tax impacts is being hailed as groundbreaking. I think you're going to find yourself in demand as a policy expert much sooner than expected." The media attention began almost immediately. The Washington Post education reporter contacted me for comments on a story about funding disparities in Virginia schools. Then NPR's education desk invited me to participate in a panel discussion about innovative approaches to education finance research. Each interview led to additional opportunities, creating a snowball effect that elevated my profile within policy circles. But the most significant moment came when I received a call from the Department of Education's Office of Planning, Evaluation, and Policy Development. They wanted to hire me as a consultant on a major federal initiative examining education funding reform options. The position would involve briefing senior department officials and potentially testifying before congressional committees about research findings. "We're particularly interested in your work on alternative funding models," explained Dr. Jennifer Martinez, the Deputy Assistant Secretary who called to discuss the opportunity. "Your research provides exactly the kind of evidence-based analysis we need to inform federal policy recommendations." The consulting contract was substantial, both financially and professionally. More importantly, it represented the kind of direct policy influence I had dreamed about when I first became interested in education research. My academic work would actually help shape federal education policy, affecting millions of students across the country. When I called my parents to share this news, their reaction was unlike anything I had experienced before. Dad's voice cracked slightly when he realized that his daughter would be advising the federal government on education policy. Mom immediately began calling relatives to share the news, her pride evident in every conversation I could overhear in the background. "I have to admit," Dad said during a quieter moment in our conversation, "I never fully understood what you were working toward, but this government position sounds incredibly important. You're going to be helping make decisions that affect the entire country." The recognition in his voice was worth years of patient explanation about my career goals. Finally, my parents could see the practical significance of the academic work they had struggled to understand. But the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. Becca called me the night after the Department of Education announcement, and her voice carried an emotion I had rarely heard from her before. "Sarah, I need to tell you something," she began, speaking more slowly than usual. I was wrong about everything I said at my graduation party. Not just wrong about you being a cautionary tale, but wrong about what success actually means. She paused, and I could hear her taking a deep breath before continuing. I've been thinking about this a lot since you moved to DC. I'm finishing my junior year, and I keep comparing my college experience to what you accomplished. I've been social and balanced, just like I said I wanted to be, but I haven't done anything that really matters. I haven't contributed to solving any real problems or made any kind of difference in the world. Her admission caught me completely off guard. Becca had always seemed so confident about her choices and so certain that her approach to success was superior to mine. You've accomplished plenty, I told her. Your business program is excellent, and you've developed leadership skills that will serve you well in whatever career you choose. But that's just it, she replied. I don't know what I want to do with those skills. I've been so focused on being well-rounded and socially successful that I never figured out what I actually care about. Meanwhile, you've known since sophomore year exactly what problems you wanted to solve and how you wanted to solve them. The conversation revealed how much Becca had been reflecting on our different approaches to college and career planning. While I had sometimes envied her social ease and apparent effortless success, she had been questioning whether her choices were leading anywhere meaningful. I've been talking to some professors about potentially changing my major, she continued. I'm thinking about switching to social work or education. I want to do something that actually helps people, like what you're doing. Her decision to shift toward social service work represented a complete reversal of the values she had articulated at her graduation party. Instead of viewing my commitment to addressing social problems as overly serious or unbalanced, she now saw it as a model worth emulating. Whatever you decide to study, I think you'll be excellent at it, I told her, and meant it. You have emotional intelligence and communication skills that would make you incredibly effective in social work. Or education. We talked for over an hour about her potential career change and the challenges of shifting academic focus during junior year. But underlying the practical discussion was a deeper conversation about what constituted a meaningful life and how to balance personal fulfillment with professional success. The Department of Education consulting work proved to be even more substantial than I had anticipated. Within 6 months, I was regularly briefing assistant secretaries and participating in high-level policy meetings that would influence federal education legislation. My research on funding disparities became central to a major Obama administration initiative aimed at reducing educational inequality. The visibility that came with this work opened additional opportunities I hadn't expected. Harvard's Kennedy School of Government invited me to present my research at a major education policy conference. The Brookings Institution offered me a fellowship to continue my funding research after completing my master's degree. Think tanks and advocacy organizations began reaching out about potential positions that would allow me to continue influencing education policy at the highest levels. But perhaps the most surprising recognition came from an entirely unexpected source. Stanford University's Graduate School of Education contacted me about potentially pursuing doctoral studies in education policy. The same institution that had rejected my undergraduate application was now actively recruiting me for their most selective graduate program. Your research trajectory is exactly what we're looking for in doctoral candidates, explained Professor Angela Thompson during our initial phone conversation. You've demonstrated the ability to conduct rigorous academic research while maintaining clear connections to practical policy applications. The irony of Stanford's interest wasn't lost on me, considering how devastated I had been by their undergraduate rejection 5 years earlier. But more than ironic, it felt like confirmation that my path through UC Davis and Georgetown had actually been better preparation for advanced graduate study than early admission to a prestigious undergraduate program might have been. When I mentioned Stanford's doctoral program interest to my parents, their reaction was almost comical in its enthusiasm. The same people who had questioned my choice to pursue policy work were now bragging to anyone who would listen about their daughter's academic achievements and policy influence. Stanford wants Sarah to continue her research there. I heard Mom tell Aunt Patricia during a family phone call. They're offering her a full fellowship to pursue a PhD in education policy. Can you imagine? Our Sarah is going to be Dr. Chen. The transformation in how my family discussed my career was remarkable. Instead of expressing concern about my focus on social problems, they now proudly shared details about my government consulting work and academic recognition. The shift wasn't just about external validation, but about their growing understanding of what I had been working toward all along. Dad's evolution was particularly touching. During one of my visits home, he asked detailed questions about my research methodology and policy recommendations. He wanted to understand not just what I was doing, but how I was doing it, and why it mattered. "I'm sorry it took me so long to appreciate what you were working on," he admitted during a quiet moment in our conversation. "I was so focused on traditional measures of success that I couldn't see the significance of the problems you were trying to solve." His apology meant more to me than any external recognition could, because it represented genuine understanding, rather than just reflected pride in my achievements. The changes in family dynamics became even more apparent during Becca's senior year. She had indeed switched her major to social work and was thriving in her new field of study. But more importantly, our relationship had evolved into something resembling genuine friendship rather than competitive comparison. She called me regularly for advice about graduate school applications and career planning, but also just to share thoughts about the social justice issues she was learning about in her coursework. The sister who had once dismissed my academic intensity as problematic now sought my guidance on how to develop similar focus and commitment in her own studies. "I keep thinking about what you said at lunch before you moved to DC," she told me during one of these conversations, about how we were comparing ourselves to each other instead of appreciating what we each brought to the family. "I think I finally understand what you meant." Her growth and self-awareness were evident in how she talked about her future plans. Instead of seeking the safest or most prestigious options, she was choosing opportunities based on potential for meaningful impact. The person who had valued social success above all else was now prioritizing purpose and contribution. My master's degree graduation became a family celebration that felt entirely different from the casual acknowledgement my undergraduate achievement had received. Mom and Dad drove across the country to attend the ceremony, staying for a full week to explore Washington, D.C. and meet my professors and colleagues. Dr. Williams hosted a reception for graduating students and their families, and I watched with amazement as my parents engaged in sophisticated conversations about education policy and research methodology. They asked intelligent questions and offered thoughtful observations that demonstrated how much they had learned about my field of work. "Your daughter is remarkable," Dr. Williams told my parents during the reception. "She's already making contributions to education policy that many researchers don't achieve until much later in their careers. We expect great things from her future work." The pride in my parents' faces was unmistakable, but it was different from the superficial pride they had always expressed about my grades and academic honors. This was deeper recognition of the significance of what I was doing and why it mattered. Even more meaningful was Becca's decision to attend my graduation, taking time off from her own final exams to be present for my achievement. She had never shown interest in my academic milestones before, but she insisted that this graduation was too important to miss. "I wanted to be here," she explained simply. "You've worked so hard for this, and I'm proud of what you've accomplished." The ceremony itself was elegant but relatively brief, focused more on acknowledging academic achievement than celebrating individual personalities. But for me, having my family present and genuinely engaged with my accomplishments felt like the validation I had been seeking throughout my academic career. After graduation, I accepted the Brookings Institution Fellowship, which would allow me to continue my education funding research while working directly with policymakers and advocacy organizations. The position represented everything I had hoped to achieve when I first became interested in public policy work. But beyond professional success, the fellowship represented something even more significant. It was confirmation that my instincts about meaningful work had been correct, that my willingness to prioritize purpose over prestige had led to opportunities that aligned perfectly with my values and interests. The summer after graduation, our family took a vacation together for the first time in several years. Instead of the typical beach resort that had characterized our previous trips, we chose to visit national parks and historical sites, planning activities around shared interests, rather than just relaxation. During a hike in Yellowstone, Becca and I found ourselves walking ahead of our parents, talking about our respective career plans and the different paths that had brought us to this point. "Do you ever regret not going to medical school?" she asked, echoing the question that had haunted family conversations for years. "Never," I replied without hesitation. "I love what I do. I can't imagine being as passionate about medicine as I am about education policy. What about you? Do you regret switching majors so late in college?" Becca shook her head firmly. "It was the best decision I ever made. I finally feel like I'm studying something that matters to me rather than just something that seems practical or impressive." Our conversation reflected how much both of us had grown in our understanding of what constituted a successful and fulfilling life. We had stopped measuring ourselves against external expectations and started evaluating our choices based on personal values and interests. That evening, as our family sat around a campfire sharing stories and planning the next day's activities, I reflected on how dramatically our relationships had evolved since that painful graduation party 3 years earlier. The daughter who had been labeled a cautionary tale was now the family member whose career path others sought to emulate. But more importantly, my family had learned to appreciate different forms of success and to recognize that meaningful achievement couldn't be measured solely through traditional metrics of prestige and financial reward. They had come to understand that my academic intensity and policy focus weren't character flaws to be overcome, but strengths that enabled me to contribute to solving important social problems. The transformation wasn't just in how they viewed my choices, but in how they thought about success more broadly. Becca's decision to switch to social work reflected their growing appreciation for careers that prioritized social impact over financial reward. Mom and Dad's enthusiastic support for her major change demonstrated how much their definition of valuable work had expanded. As I prepared to begin my fellowship at Brookings, I felt grateful not just for the professional opportunities that lay ahead, but for the family relationships that had been strengthened through honest communication and mutual understanding. The girl who had once felt invisible in her own home was now someone whose opinions were sought and valued, whose achievements were celebrated with genuine comprehension of their significance. The journey from cautionary tale to policy expert had been longer and more complex than I could have anticipated, involving not just professional development, but fundamental shifts in family dynamics and personal confidence. But sitting by that campfire, surrounded by people who finally understood and appreciated what I was working toward, I knew that every difficult conversation and moment of doubt had been worth it. My story wasn't just about individual achievement, but about the importance of staying true to your values even when others don't understand them. It was about the difference between seeking approval and seeking impact, between conforming to expectations and creating your own definition of success. Most importantly, it was about the possibility of transformation, both personal and relational. Families could learn to appreciate different forms of excellence. Siblings could move beyond competition to mutual support. And young people could trust their instincts about meaningful work, even when the path seemed uncertain or undervalued by others. The cautionary tale had become an inspiration, not just for my family, but for the students and young professionals who reached out seeking advice about pursuing careers in public service. My experience demonstrated that academic intensity and social commitment weren't obstacles to success, but foundations for work that could make a real difference in the world. And that understanding, more than any professional achievement or external recognition, felt like the truest measure of a life well lived. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.